You're here because you have a folder on your hard drive that looks more like a graveyard than a finished collection of your work. You know the one I'm talking about, and I'm sure you could relate. It's the one with dozens, maybe hundreds of works in progress that sound sick, but they've been sitting at 80% for months, or worse, they never made it past the initial loop stage. Look, there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not lacking talent, and you definitely don't need more plugins. What you're suffering from is a systemic failure in your workflow called the technician trap. A few years ago, I hit this exact wall. Many of you know that on top of producing full time, I'm also an educator and mentor for mastering.com. While searching for balance in both of these high demanding careers, I stumbled upon a book called The Four Disciplines of Execution. It's a classic in the business world for a reason. It's designed to help teams execute on their most important goals amidst the daily whirlwind of life. As I was reading it, a light bulb went off, and I realized that it wasn't just a corporate strategy. It applied perfectly to the struggle of finishing music. I've since taken those core principles and built a specialized system around them specifically for producers. Seriously, if you're about like time management and stuff, go pick up that book. But I'm going to show you exactly how I translated those 40x pillars into a repeatable engine for my music projects. So let's jump in. So let's start off with discipline one, which is focus on the wildly important. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to finishing a track. There's mixing, there's mastering, there's arrangement, but arguably the most important thing you could do for yourself as a producer is build a sonic world for your story to live in. Without a defined world, you're just the pilot flying without a flight plan. You're susceptible to every distraction and technical rabbit hole that pops up. I'm sure you've had this moment happen too, where you're busy in creation mode and you hit a technical hurdle and suddenly find yourself lost in YouTube pit of despair, watching tutorial after tutorial trying to get over it, right? See, world building is different because it's intuitive, not so much technical. It's more about the why, not just the how. When you get this right, you establish a true world identity, the track honestly starts to write itself. Think about it. Once the laws of your world are set, the sections, the progression of your story, the emotional arc all start to flow naturally. Your sound selection, your sound design, the effects you reach for, even the lyrics that you write, they are all dictated by the environment you've created. Once you flesh this out, you aren't just guessing anymore, you're just fulfilling the requirements of the world. This is what I call strategic intention. It's the shift from picking sounds just because they sound dope or they sound cool in the project to picking sounds because they're correct for the narrative. If I decide the world of my track is a tribal forest in a dark, secluded, ancient time, that definition acts as a high-level filter for all of my choices. So for instance, let's take a look at one of the songs that I'm creating called Destroyer. When it comes to world building, I really wanted to create this story that I was seeing in my head, right? This like demonic goddess called the Destroyer that, you know, was located in this really ancient tribal forest that would like lure her victims in and, you know, entice them with this beautiful sounding voice, almost like a siren. And then she would quickly like, you know, trap them and turn on them. And she aimed to kind of destroy mankind, right? That's the story that I was thinking about in my head. And I often think that it's really important to get to the point where you can like visually see a story in your head, because this will help you kind of select some sounds. But essentially, when I started this, I was really only focusing on creating this like 8-bar intro that kind of had this feeling involved with it. So this is kind of the world that I was building. And I did this through a whole bunch of different sounds, from tribal drums to forest sounds and cicadas. You can hear it, but again, it was very intentional about what I was seeing in my mind, and it helped me kind of fill in those gaps. So take a listen. Right. So I used a lot of different sounds and Foley and, you know, field recordings to kind of create that atmosphere. Also, those like ethnic kind of singing chant vibes with reverb to kind of really accentuate that feeling and make it feel kind of like mystical, but also like ancient. Right. And that definitely inspired the rest of the track. And I'll play like the rest of the intro just so you can get idea, because again, this then inspired the artist to start writing this story as well once I fed her kind of my idea. So take a listen.
Come a little closer, step into the ring. Hear the heavy drums, let the shadows sing. Honey on my tongue, venom in the bite. Lose yourself to me, slip into the night. Feel the heavy bass shaking up your bones. Welcome to the dark, welcome to the throne. Skin against the skin, fever in the heat. Dancing to the fire, following the beat. You thought it was love, you thought it was sweet, but I am the snare that lies at your feet. The air's getting thin, the temperature drops. Once the rhythm starts, it never ever stops. Call me the destroyer, bringer of the end. I am not your lover, I am not your friend. Drink the poison down, heavy is the crown. Watch the temple burn, watch it crumble down.
And again, that creates that emotional bed and the emotional narrative of that arc. By the time I got to the point where I started building the rest of this section, it just was really clear for how the song needed to transition to tell this story that I was seeing in my head. When you have a North Star for your song, you shift from being someone who builds the track vertically, stacking tons of sounds until you lose the creative plot, to someone who lets the story and the emotional arc dictate how the sounds unfold. You no longer need to check 500 snares because maybe a clean acoustic pop snare objectively violates the laws of the world you just built. It defines those little moments, right? Like those glitchy artifacts or pitch shifted delays, not as some random ear candy, but more as environmental storytelling. To make this goal real, we really need to anchor it directly to the sonic world that you've defined. What we could do is we can use a specific formula from the book called the XY formula. This is a way to create a tangible target we can execute on that will move us in the direction of our goals. An example of this might be something like move this track from X to Y by this specific date. But in this formula, X and Y aren't just some like technical milestones. X is the absence of the world and Y is the full realization of it, right? For the session I just showed you, my wig was simple. It was move this 8-bar sketch to a fully realized world of a dark, sinister demon goddess called the Destroyer, who lures listeners into her trap by Friday at 5. Notice how the goal isn't just to finish the track, it's to bring the world to life. When your finish line is defined by the completion of your sonic identity rather than a technical checklist, every decision you make becomes way more clear. It's really important to be as specific as possible. Let's move on to discipline 2, the 5 core habits of lead measures. Before we dive in, we have to clarify 2 terms, lag measures and lead measures. Lag measures are the end result that you want, like the finished music, the master track ready for a release, right? The problem becomes you can't directly control these things. They're outcomes that only appear after all of the work is done. Lead measures, on the other hand, are the specific actions and habits that you control right now. Those daily or weekly behaviors that, if you do consistently, will make that finished track inevitable, right? Think of them as the inputs that predict the outputs. Discipline 2 is where the real work actually happens. We're moving away from obsessing over lag measures, like focusing on finishing the music, and we're really going to shift towards focusing on the lead measures. Again, these are the predictable habits that make finishing inevitable. I've broken these down into 5 core input habits that I found are the only things you really need to focus on to finish music consistently. The first habit is inundation, or soaking it in. Before you open your DAW, spend 10 to 20 minutes deeply immersing yourself in some kind of art that inspires the creative story that you're looking to, chase. Look at concept art, watch a film scene, listen to music that lives in the world that you want to build. I, a lot of the times, will, for instance, look at stuff like Midjourney. So when it comes to Inundation, I like to use Midjourney to create these mood boards to inspire the story that I'm hearing in my head, right? So, I create these mood boards that give me these visual cues and like these ideas as far as where I can take my sounds and my textures and my Foley and some of the effects that I might use. So when I look at this, I see like very dark, and like the reds give me that feeling of like aggression and distortion. And when I look at like the leaves, I hear the wind and maybe like bugs, crickets, rustling. Uh, the feature of the demon is like very beautiful in a way. So it's like it reminds me of like a beautiful voice, like luring, but also like demonic in a way, right? And I have a bunch of these different mood boards that I kind of generate to kind of give me that sense, to give me those feelings, to inundate myself with these kind of creative aspects of the story that I'm looking up. And the way that I create these, right, is like I first create a narrative of like what I want to make, right? Like a story, like creating just a literal story in my mind. And then I'll ask Midjourney to generate me a mood board based off of that narrative. Right? And so a lot of these, while they look wicked and very demonic for sure, they really do help me kind of see where I take my sounds. And I like to inundate myself way before I start to curate the sounds that I'm going to use for that session. I keep my priming sessions separate from my flow sessions. So again, while I'm priming the idea and priming myself with these kind of moods and these stories, and the mood boards that influence that, I'm also then maybe even having this open while I go and select my sounds. And when I'm selecting my sounds, I'm letting these visual cues stimulate that selection process. This isn't referencing where you're trying to copy a kick drum pattern or a structure of a song. This is sensory priming. You're soaking in the mood so that when you finally sit down to produce, your unconscious mind is already calibrated. Think of it as pre-production for your soul, ensuring that your technical brain doesn't crush you and lead the session. Next is priming your world. There is so much power in preparation and curation and actually creating constraints for yourself. To find that true creative strength, you really need to impose constraints, right? Before you write a single note, start curating a folder of 10 to 20 to 30 different sounds, textures, or presets that all represent and inspire that world or that narrative that you're aiming to create. By pre-filtering these noises and these sounds, you eliminate the paradox of choice. When you're in the flow, you aren't browsing, you're executing with the tools that you already know belong there. Now, when it comes to curating, I think it's really important to start developing a system for yourself. Now, I use LoopCloud. You don't have to use like a sample manager, but I think sample managers are dope. I have a video on sample managers, so go check that out. But for me, it's like it's really easy to create these collections, and then as I start to curate my own sound palette based off of the mood or the story that I'm going for, it makes it really easy to keep it all into one place. Keeping different samples and different things that inspire me, abstract effects and sound design kind of stuff, and risers and all of this stuff that really pull the song together and give it an identity. I kind of do that in a separate session. So again, I'm listening for that matchup between my visual cue and the story that I'm trying to create, and finding sounds that help me accent that and tell that narrative. Then I save them for later so that when I go to produce the song, I'm not, getting caught up in going through like thousands of presets or thousands of different samples. I have them all ready to go, and I know that they're going to fit that narrative that I'm working to create. So I highly suggest, if you don't have a system, create that system, whether that's, a simple folder management system, whether that's a management system in your DAW or something like a sample manager like LoopCloud, Splice, and there's tons of others. Now we build the energy pillars. Most producers start really hot right out of the gate at the beginning of the session and then run out of steam by the second verse. Instead, I want you to focus on building one of these two sections, which is either the climax of the story, which is the drop or the chorus normally, or the setup, which is the intro. In Destroyer, I started out with the intro because it sets the initial vibe and helped me really see the rest of the story unfold. Once you lock in the setup, it provides the momentum that pulls the rest of the arrangement towards it. When you work on the intro, it defines the emotional atmosphere from the first frame of the story, making the rest of the song so much easier to fill in because the start is already finished. This also works really well for the climax or the drop, but I find creating that emotional bed is much easier to do in the intro than in the drop. And a lot of the times when I focus on the intro first, it kind of informs where I need to go with the drop so that when I create both of these pillars, the intro and the chorus, it makes it very easy to build a bridge from both in a way that is conducive to the story of the song. This is the habit that separates the pros from the hobbyists. It's audio commitment. You have to learn to bounce in place frequently. Once the sound fits your world and the energy is exactly right, you have to lock it in. Another thing that I like to do again is just committing to audio. So a lot of these like intricate patterns that I've created or like things with the vocal that I've done, I'm bouncing them in place and resampling them. Essentially, I have a resample workflow. So I like processing things and then turning them into audio. And it becomes really, really easy to manage CPU and manage all of the sounds, especially in a big project like this, where I have tons of different things happening, right? So it's very, very important that you also start to think in those terms of like, making some final decisions and bouncing things in place. Obviously, there's some MIDI here that aren't bounced in place, but these were like some of the new additions that I've added to the song, right? But normally, when I am pretty confident about an idea or about the direction that I'm taking an idea, I will commit to that, both to free up CPU, but also to lock in that decision and free up some mental bandwidth for the rest of the song. Our DAWs give us infinite what ifs, and honestly, that's a psychological trap. By turning that MIDI and those 15 plugins on a channel into a permanent audio file, you're committing to the performance. It stops the technical brain from second guessing the creative brain. It clears your CPU, and more importantly, it clears your mental headspace to focus on the next high-level problem. The final habit is building the narrative bridge. This is how we connect our energy pillars to the environmental storytelling. When talking about energy pillars, again, we can come back to the intro here and we can kind of see this, this initial moment that I've created here. Right. And it also has the vocal that starts on bar 10. And the funny thing about that is then this next section, right, into the chorus starts at bar 34, but this big gap here, this pre-chorus essentially is like a big transition between that. So I started with this section here, building that intro and world building and kind of creating all of that setting for that story. And then I moved on to creating this section here, which is the chorus.
Call me the destroyer, bringer of the end. I am not your lover, I am not your friend. Drink the poison down, heavy is the crown. Watch the temple burn, watch it crumble down.
So creating that, and then having those now, each of those pillars, right, the chorus and that intro section allows me to create that bridge, that transitional kind of bridge there. And instead of letting the music play into that, I really wanted to create this narrative story here where, she got what she wanted and she kind of lured you in and you fell for her tricks. And now like the realization starts to set in that you aren't where you think you are and things are about to get a whole lot worse for you. So again, listen to this transition between these two sections.
To the throne, skin against the skin, fever in the heat, dancing to the fire, following the beat. You thought it was love, you thought it was sweet, but I am the snare that lies at your feet. The air's getting thin, the temperature drops. Once the rhythm starts, it never ever stops. Call me the destroyer, bringer of the end. I am not your lover.
Right, using like these transitional effects, these bugs, the reverb, the swells, the whooshes, these like really ambiguous swells of silence and reverb, right? You use that to kind of fill in that emotional gap. And again, once you start thinking of this world and the narrative, it becomes very easy to produce because you're not thinking of like, oh, I need to, put this sound here and sound here. It's like the story initiates how all of the sounds should even lay out in the first place, right? And also having the vocal is really nice too, because now that I have the vocal, it helps me see the rest of the story, which again is another reason why you should find collaborators to work with. Instead of a generic white noise riser, use the sound from your world kit to create an event. In Destroyer, I use tons of delay, reverbs, and cinematic hits to progress the emotion of the story. It doesn't just transition the energy, it tells the story of seduction in a trance-like tribal state, right? This ensures that your arrangement feels like a cohesive journey rather than a collection of loops. All right, moving on to Discipline 3. Discipline 3 is keeping a compelling scoreboard. People play a lot differently when they're keeping score. And if you don't have a visible way to track your progress, you're going to get lost in the whirlwind of daily life. I like to use a simple checklist in Notion that keeps track of those 5 habits we just talked about. World identity confirmed, world kit curated, energy pillars locked in, narrative bridges constructed, and sonic polish, which is kind of like the mix, right? Seeing that progress bar move towards 100% triggers a dopamine release that keeps me engaged. It gamifies it and moves it from just messing around in the project to really taking a track all the way through to the finish line and being able to release it. Finally, Discipline 4 is creating a rhythm of accountability. This is the 4-week release cycle. You have to set hard deadlines and stick to it. The biggest fear here is releasing something that isn't perfect, right? But we have to redefine done as releasable. You have to build your finishing muscle through repetition, not through 6 months of micro tweaking one snare. Think of it as version 1.0. You ship it, you learn from it, and those things will inform version 2.0 next month. Public deadlines, whether it's a YouTube upload or a Spotify release, provide that social pressure needed to kill perfectionism. At the end of the day, finishing music isn't a matter of luck or waiting for inspiration to strike. It's about having a repeatable engine that protects your creative flow from technical friction. When you use the 40X framework, focusing on the world, acting on those lead measures, keeping a scoreboard, and holding yourself accountable to a cycle, the unfinished track crisis starts to vanish. You shift from being a loopmaker to a world builder. You start creating music that doesn't just sound professional, but it feels cohesive and intentional. I hope this helped you. And if you enjoyed this content and want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and tap that notification bell. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.